Good day, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful podcast. I always say that, and I'm always got my fingers crossed that it's going to be wonderful, and it has been up to now. So, yes, it's going to be another wonderful podcast because we have the lovely Rebecca Jackson, and we're going to take it from a different point of view, and we're going to see how we're going to flow this time. And Rebecca's going to introduce herself to tell us what she's doing. And then we'll go with the flow because you never know what's gonna flow. So, Rebecca, introduce yourself. Let us know what you're all about.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here, and I feel like you set us up. I'm like, knock on wood. I want to make sure it's a great podcast as well. Here we go. I'm Dr. Rebecca Jackson. I'm the Chief Programs Officer for a company called Brain Balance. And we're a company that's focused on building and strengthening the brain to optimize development and performance. So I spend my career doing research, building and designing programs, and understanding what is it that we can do in our daily lives that can make a difference to minimize some of the complications and challenges people may face. And to me, it's so important to think about these challenges not just as diagnosis specific. Not just people with ADHD struggle with attention and productivity. If you're facing a time of stress in your life, if you experience chronic pain, there's a lot of things in our life that can chip away at our abilities to pay attention, plan, and organize, whether we're a child or an adult, diagnosed or undiagnosed. So I want to know, what is it about the brain that supports those functions, and what can we do to improve our functions and abilities?
Hi, Rebecca. That sounds like a amazing thing to do to help people just to be more productive, and also less brain fog. Would you say also there's quite a few things that you do there to help people just have that more focus and to help them with their lives they've been struggling with. And the mind is quite a complex thing. What I want to know also is, what made you go in this direction? Was it a situation that you just wanted to do something to help people in that way? And leaving the business aside, want to know what made you tick to want to help people in that. Did you come across something that happened in your life that made you think, listen, I want to help people in this way, and this is the reason why?
Yeah, yes, in many things really contributed to it. I started my professional career as a chiropractor. So I think I've always been drawn to understanding how the brain and body work and function, understanding what can I do in a natural, holistic way to minimize pain, optimize function. So I'm the person that if I have a headache, before I jump to the Advil, I'm going to think, did I get enough sleep? Am I hydrated? Have I eaten? I want to understand the why behind a symptom. To me, a symptom is a red flag saying, draw attention to this.
Yeah.
And then I want to know, what can I do to change the symptom rather than just masking it or covering it up. But really, I was drawn to this work, and I was a new mom. I was pregnant with baby number 2, and I had a toddler. And at that time, I had sold my practice. My husband's job moved us across the country. And so I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And I was doing all the reading I could to understand development. And I wanted to know, what could I do for my kids to really set these little ones up for success in life. Okay. And what I was finding was, sing songs, play patty cake, all great things, but I wanted to understand the neurology of development. So I went back to school, and the very first course I took was the neurology of dyslexia. And at the time, my husband was traveling. He was on a trip with his dad. And I called him and I said, Doug, you're dyslexic. And he laughed and he said, no, I'm not. And his dad spoke up in the background and said, yeah, you are. Keep in mind, my husband, he was probably 36 at the time.
Wow.
He's a graduate of Vanderbilt University, brilliant guy, has done a lot of really cool things in his career. He had no idea that he had dyslexia. And so we started to have this conversation. I said, and you also struggle with auditory processing. Doug couldn't catch what I said on his phone, and his dad spoke up in the background and said, yes, you were diagnosed with that too.
Oh, wow.
And so for me, all of a sudden, this became personal on a different level, where these were challenges that my husband was facing without even realizing he was facing. And I saw the modifications and strategies he put in place so that he still could be successful. But all of a sudden it became really personal, because I know an individual with dyslexia, there's a high likelihood that then one or both of our kids would be impacted with that as
That's
well.
right. Yeah.
So I wanted to understand what was happening in the brain that were complicating things, and could there be anything done? So then the next phone call I made was to my mom, and my mom was an elementary school psychologist for her entire career.
Okay.
And I called her and I said, Mom, what are the schools doing about this? If a child is struggling to read, if a child is struggling to stay on task and pay attention in the classroom, what do the schools do? And her answer was, we're not doing what needs to be done. She will tell you that she felt her whole career was working around challenges and not truly creating change. So the student that was struggling to read, they would pull the student from the classroom and they would do the same curriculum, but now in a one-on-one environment. Or if that strategy didn't work, then they would try a different curriculum. But changing the environment and changing the curriculum does not change how the brain takes in and processes information. So in that moment, I went from wanting to be a stay-at-home mom to saying, we know that there's ways to strengthen and change how the brain takes in and processes information. How do we get this out there to help people succeed? So that was kind of the long story of a couple events that happened that really piqued my interest, made this topic more personal to me. And here I am.
And I'll tell you what makes it so powerful too. There's a few things that I noted there, which is, number one is that you're interested in the why, which is very powerful, because it's all very well masking or trying to, like, for instance, when we're ill, we always go to the doctor to just take a tablet, right? But I me myself, why did that happen? So I can change my eating habits or my environmental habits, etc. The why is very important, because that's what's going to bring you back to your natural equilibrium, natural health, rather having to use a crutch all the time. And so your perspective of the why is very powerful. But not only that, your husband, who's very successful, very intelligent, he obviously, for him to cope within life, he put processes in to help him get through his stages, and he didn't know he had all these things, even though his father obviously knew. And yet, even though we may have some form of neurodivergence, it doesn't stop us from being successful. And you realize that yourself, and that's how it was obviously personal to you and gave you that extra push to help so many people from so many different walks of lives. And that's great from that point of view. So that is really nice to hear. It was personal to you, and then you went forward to be successful in the career you're doing now. So turning that around now, what have you put into place, or what can be done to help people? Now, you touched on it basically at the beginning, but give me a, for instance, if you're dyslexic, like Doug, your partner, what's the kind of thing that could be put into place? Give us an example.
Sure.
In layman terms.
Right. Okay. We can do this. You know, I'm going to back up before I answer that question.
Okay.
From my perspective, there are so many interesting tools out there to provide a diagnosis. I am less interested in the diagnosis. I want to understand what are the symptoms and challenges that are present. And to me, what's more important than the label is what can we do to create change? And I think that's important because so many people get hung up on the label. And I find that, again, interesting because of my personal experience, in that my husband's parents made the decision to not share that information with Doug. And, you know, right, wrong, there's interesting nuances to that. Doug has a very high IQ. They didn't want to put anything in his path that would be an excuse or I can't do that because. So they didn't want to give him what they were afraid would be a stigma or an idea that could potentially hold him back in life.
I get that.
honestly, I think over time, I don't know if they forgot or it just wasn't a topic of conversation. Now, that being said, there are values and benefits that do come with a diagnosis or a label. When my husband found that out and then did a little reading, it was an aha moment for him of understanding, why in college on Friday night when his buddies were out having fun, he needed to spend more time in the library. He will tell you he had to work harder than his peers, what felt like to him harder than others, to get the same thing done. He could get there, but it took more time, more energy, more effort. He had to figure out and learn how to study, and what worked for his roommate and buddies didn't work for him.
Yeah.
So there was relief and a sense of understanding when he received the diagnosis. So, just interesting nuances there. But to me, I love focusing my energy on what do we do to change it so that we don't need to worry about what the diagnosis is. How do we strengthen the brain? So when it comes to a condition such as dyslexia, we know that this is a neurodevelopmental condition, which means as the brain comes together, the way we develop has an impact on our abilities. And dyslexia, while we think of it as a letter reversal, what we know is it's a multi-sensory processing disruption.
Okay.
So as you and I, Eli, are having this conversation right now, I'm watching you through the computer while listening.
Yeah.
I'm relying on my senses of auditory and visual to work together to translate what's happening.
Yes.
If there's any disruption in those senses, it's going to disrupt my experience of what I'm seeing or hearing. So we know with dyslexia that it's a phonological, language-based challenge. But what happens is sometimes there's a disconnect in how the individual hears and sees and how those pathways are working together. So if I'm a child sitting in the classroom and I can't quite catch every word that the teacher is saying, I'm going to rely on my visual input to help to fill in the blanks.
Yes.
So maybe I'm going to try to read her words, or I'm going to look around and see what the other kids are doing. Did I miss a direction? And so I'm going to see what everybody else is doing to try to keep up. When we're having to play catch up and we're missing bits and pieces of information, that's incredibly fatiguing to the brain. And now I'm not confident in what I'm hearing and seeing. Did I hear that right? Did I see that right? And what happens with early reading is if I'm not hearing sound accurately, it's not being stored in my brain accurately. So if I hear a sound, let's say we're looking at the CH combination in the English language, that would be ch. But if my brain hears that as sh rather than ch, which is a subtle difference, now every time I see that, I just encoded it incorrectly. It's like if you showed me a dog and told me it was a cat. Every time I see a dog, my brain would think cat.
Yeah.
So it's a disconnect in the coding of the brain.
Yeah.
And so now every time I'm seeing that, there's a complication that's going to slow things down and complicate things. So what we know, and there's other aspects that go with it. With dyslexia, we know not only is it a multi-sensory processing, but there's often differences in the eye movements and fluidity. So with dyslexia, we can see a higher likelihood for the eyes to not smoothly track, to not start in the upper left-hand corner for English language readers and scan across to the right and go from top bottom. There might be more of a tendency for those eyes to start at the bottom of the page or want to move from right to left versus left to right. When we watch a struggling reader with eye tracking technology, we can watch what the eyes do, and we watch them jump and skip and move up a line and down a line and then back up. We can watch an individual with dyslexia will actually hyper focus on a word. And so there's increased attention rather than decreased attention because there's so much work that's having to go through to decode that word or that sound. So it's a matter of improving the synchronization of multisensory processing. So I'm hearing and seeing things accurately and it's syncing together in the proper timing. We want to improve eye movement so that they're smooth and fluid and consistent, and you're not doing too much work that's just going to drain energy. And when we drive those changes, we see an increase in comprehension, we see an increase in retention of information, and an increase in success with learning, because dyslexia is not an intelligence issue. It's a processing challenge that can get in the way of learning.
No, you're totally right. I mean, I'm said to myself, so everything you said is it ring true to me, because you're totally right. I mean, my mother always gone into, you know, yeah, detail. How did you miss that, son? It's right there. Oh yeah, it is right there. You know, that kind of thing, and all those other things you speak about. So it resonates to me massively. And unfortunately, I didn't get no help when I was at school and everything else. But you know, we find ways around it and do the best we can. Regarding ADHD, now how does that work out?
So what ADHD is neurologically is immaturity in multiple areas of function in the brain. And I think ADHD gets a bad rap. We think of ADHD as lack of attention and behavior. You know, we say ADHD and most people picture the, 6-year-old boy in a classroom falling out of his seat and throwing spitballs at his buddy. But what we know about ADHD is there's about a 30% immaturity in connectivity in the parts of the brain that help us sustain attention, that do impulse control, that are involved with emotional regulation. So how do I handle myself when I'm frustrated and upset? And in the parts of our brain that support our executive functions, our goal-directed behaviors, our ability to organize, plan, and execute. So to me, a great way to understand what ADHD is if we picture a child. Let's talk about a 10-year-old. If we think about, if we had a 10-year-old who had a 30% immaturity in aspects of development, a 10-year-old is going to be about a grade 5, about a 5th grader. But now we have a child with ADHD that's going to be functioning in some aspects of development more on par with a 7-year-old, which would be about a grade 2, a 2nd grader. So can you imagine what it would look like if I put a 7-year-old in a 5th grade classroom and said, I want you to keep up, follow along, do your work independently, make friends and interact with your peers. It doesn't mean that the 7-year-old isn't awesome and brilliant and funny and a great kid, but we're now putting expectations on this child in line with their age, not their development. And so that child is going to need more support to stay on task, to work independently for longer. They're going to have more of a tendency to get frustrated and upset. The younger we are, the bigger the meltdowns and upset with tears and outbursts. So ADHD is immaturity in the parts of the brain that help us pay attention, plan, organize, and execute. And one of the favorite things that I've learned when it comes to the brain is the brain can change at any age. So the fact that you didn't get the ideal supports in school doesn't mean that it's too late for you. Now, is it easier to change the brain at a young age? Yes. There's fewer layers of an onion in a child with less life lived. And the brain, a young brain just changes faster. But it doesn't mean, if you're an adult with ADHD at any age, it doesn't mean that it's too late for you, that we can still build and strengthen and improve and optimize the brain. In fact, a study that we're working on at Brain Balance right now is looking at changes in cognition in adults who are doing the Brain Balance program. And we're seeing the largest gains in sustained attention and inhibitory control, that impulse control. So to be able to see those changes taking place in adults and then to hear in their own language how that impacts their life. I love seeing the research, but even more than being a part of the research, seeing the real life, real world impact means a lot.
Wow. Now, you actually describe everything so well and clearly, so thank you for that. Next thing that I'm curious about, autism.
Yeah.
Why to come from that angle?
Yeah. Autism is complex. I think years from now, we're going to talk about autism differently. you know, there's many different presentations of autism, and what we're starting to see in research is there are some subsets of autism that have genetic factors. Genetic factors are harder to change and overcome. If it's you know, our DNA, we can change expression of things, but we can't change the DNA itself. And you know, I want to fast forward decades from now to understand the different phenotypes or the different presentations of autism. There's some common features that we can see across autism in terms of, you know, there can be an impact on language, on social connection, on emotional regulation, on sensory processing. But the more I learn about autism, the more nuanced and fascinating it is. And just because an individual doesn't have the ability to express language in the same way you and I do, doesn't mean that the language is not there internally and that the intelligence isn't there. And one of the things that has been so important to me to learn and understand about autism is we've always thought of autism as this non-social condition where, you know, you see less eye contact, more isolation, more of the individual wanting to be on their own. And that might be the behaviors that we're seeing. But when you talk to individuals with autism, there is still a social connectedness there, a social desire, a social need for those connections and relationships. There just might be a difference in the way they connect and engage and interact. So I think of all of these things, whether it's dyslexia or ADHD or autism, as a spectrum. But we only talk about autism as a spectrum. But all of these conditions have varying presentations. There can be differences between males and females, differences in age, and differences within individuals. So the more that we can understand about the spectrum of these conditions, the different severity, the different combinations of relative strengths and weaknesses, then I think the better we can do to understand so that we can help and support. And I think what's interesting and exciting to me is what we're seeing in society right now is an awareness and awakening of how neurodivergent individuals are so necessary and needed in the workplace, to be able to look at something from a different perspective. So if we think about an individual with autism, if it's an individual that has incredible working memory, an incredible long-term memory, an incredible logic and reasoning, the ability to look at a problem and solve it, what we need to do as a society is create better work environments so we know how to allow that person to share their gifts and talents and abilities, because it's needed. That ability to look at something from a different perspective.
Let's speak about that, the work environment side of it. So when it comes to the work environment, what can be changed within the work environment to help people actually like us to be able to cope within that environment, as well as to help people understand and support us at the same time? So what can be done within that environment?
And I think it's not cope, it's thrive, right? It's because if you thrive, your whole team thrives, the company thrives when things are set up well. You know, I would say the ideal setup and scenario is different based on the individual and the condition that we're talking about. So if we're talking about dyslexia, if we think about what would be an optimal work environment and understanding for coworkers to know what's the best way to work and collaborate, knowing that there's differences in auditory and visual processing. And so for an individual with dyslexia, the ability to hear and see something at the same time is helpful. So if you're sitting in class or working on something with a colleague, if there was a you know, best practices for a team member with dyslexia is send the information over ahead of time so that individual has the time to review the information. They can take as much time as they need, because again, it's not a difference in intelligence. You might just need a little bit more time to get through the material. And I'll tell you, with my husband, for him to read a book or to read something, I read all the time. I'm an incredibly fast reader. Doug is a very slow reader. I retain 20% of what I read. He can pull out every fact and detail he read. So it's going to take him longer to get through it, but he's going to retain more in one read. I'd have to go back and reread multiple times to pull out of it what he pulls out of it.
Yeah.
But so to give somebody the time to go through the material and then have a conversation about it, and then to go back and forth to say, okay, what are the next steps? What does this information mean? Knowing that strategies to help, organization and structure, knowing, you know, timelines and deadlines, and not shifting and changing, but here's what's expected, here's how much time you have to do it. I think those are great strategies. And so often when we think about the strategies for success in the workplace for a neurodivergent individual or in the classroom, they're the strategies that set all of us up to succeed, diagnosis or not. We all do better with structure. We all do better to, you know, to have time to absorb information before we need to take time. And I think it's understanding each individual's communication style. So, you know, is phone better for an individual? It's nice. I really like this face-to-face time. I watch your body language. I'm going to see, okay, have I gone too far? I'm talking a lot. So I need to, you know, I can read you to see that. So for me, I prefer FaceTime. For some people, that's actually distracting and not helpful. Some people might focus better and be more productive on a phone call rather than the visual input. If that visual input isn't adding to my value of this interaction and exchange, don't force it if it's not beneficial, just because we do everything on Zoom. So those are, and I will be clear, modifications and structure and support for neurodivergent individuals in the workplace is not my specialty. It's an area I give thought to, but I spend more time focused on what do we do to change the brain to help an individual succeed. So this is more of my off-the-cuff talking.
No, I mean, obviously, I know, I totally understand that, but obviously you in the right circle, meeting people that actually probably do that, because you will do that naturally. But what I did want to ask you, I mean, what are the solutions? This is what you do. So if you have a client, what solutions do you actually give your client? For instance, because obviously every individual is an individual, so there'll be certain things that have to be different. But in general, from your company point of view, what were the active solutions you would implement to help with their situation?
Sure. I'll try to give a quick overview here, but no, I wrote a book, it came out last September, Back on Track, a practical guide to help kids of all ages thrive. And kids of all ages means adults as well. The book is filled with the practical tips and things that you can do from home on your own. And please know that a book will never be a replacement for a full comprehensive program. But I want people to know what are the things that you can do on a daily basis to optimize current function. Then at Brain Balance, anytime we're approaching an individual, we start with an assessment. We need to know and understand your development. And I talk about development whether you're 50 or 5, because it's our brain development that supports our ability to perform and execute. So we start with a really comprehensive assessment, because I want to understand what are the skills and functions that you've optimized. What are those relative strengths and weaknesses? And I see those gaps in development as opportunities. So as hard as things are for you, this is our opportunity to close that gap so your brain doesn't have to work as hard. So our assessment does everything from eye tracking so that we can see and understand the speed, efficiency, and accuracy of your eye movements. We look at visual processing and auditory processing to see how quickly and accurately you're able to perceive information. We look at a lot of physical elements, your balance, your coordination, your rhythm and timing, because with the brain, everything starts simple and builds in complexity. We develop first our physical coordination, and then we develop our cognitive coordination. So I always say a discoordinated body is going to be a discoordinated brain. And a discoordinated brain is going to have a hard time then organizing and executing. So physical information about rhythm and timing and coordination actually provides us a roadmap of how to optimize and maximize cognitive coordination. And cognitive coordination is that ability to put thoughts together and draw connections, to learn something and write an essay, or to problem solve for a scenario, or to plan. You know, I've got a project due 3 months from now. What are all the steps that I need to make in order to deliver on that deadline? So then what we do for the program is it's all about engaging as many different regions and functions of the brain as we can simultaneously, because we don't do anything with the brain in isolation. I'm never only using one function at a time. So again, back to our conversation, there's auditory processing, visual processing happening right now. You're paying attention. Hopefully there's working memory kicking in. I'm taking occasional notes, so there's fine motor skills. We need all those functions to work together. And if there's a disruption in any one of those functions, it's going to change the experience. And so we need the brain to be able to process all of that sensory input and information while balancing and having the appropriate timing and coordination. So I always say we exercise the brain the way you use it in real life, which is all of these skills and functions coalescing to work together. So it looks like exercise for the brain and body. So we hook you up with all sorts of different sensory gear. So you've got colored glasses with flashing lights, and you've got tactile vibration happening, and you've got sound happening with a rhythmic beat, while we're having you do coordinated eye movements and visual processing and auditory processing and physical coordinated tasks. So it's,
well, it feels like the brain's going to the gym. It's about
exactly.
yeah. That's what it sounds like, and it's
Yeah.
the way it needs to be, because just like anything, you have to work something out. You want to get muscle mass, you have to do it. If you and also the brain's a muscle, right? So you have to work that muscle in a particular way for that to start growing and developing and etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So can I ask you a few questions?
Yeah, go on. Be nosy then. Go on.
I want to learn about you. So, you know, you shared that you have dyslexia. I'm curious to hear, what are some of the strategies that you've put in place that have been really helpful to you? And what are some of the areas where you've got to put more attention, or some of the areas where you find yourself struggling?
Yeah, I mean, part of my dyslexia is literally when I see things, they're a completely different thing, or when I see things, a lack of detail sometimes.
Okay.
Memory, I have an issue with memory, and that's always been a problem. Now, strategies to those things I've talked about is the memory is always there, to the point it can get worse. But most people know I don't have it. That's because I get myself in habits. For instance, keys. I always leave my keys in a certain place. Phone. I've always leave my phone in a certain place. My shoes, so on and so forth. So even when I go, oh, where have I put that? Oh, it always goes there. And when I look, it's there, right? So you find solutions just like anything in life, and get yourself into habit forming. Yeah. So then you can always do those things. When it comes to the lack of detail, yes, I can't get away with certain things where it's a lack of detail, because people will say, how did you miss that? It's right there in front of you. And it doesn't matter whether it's my mother, my partner, my friends, they all can't believe it. You know, even to this day, they can't believe that. But the thing is I'm strong on detail when it comes to solving problems. So when it comes to anything to do with business related things, or a friend's talking to me about their life and they can't resolve a problem, I seem to be able to resolve it within 10 minutes flat. And sometimes I don't know how I solve it. I can see details within patterns of what they're talking about, just like the kind of thing on the podcast. So I'll give you a real-time situation. Now, most people, when they do a podcast, they'll have a list of questions they want to ask. They'll actually find out about the person and their whole background and so on and so forth. So they'll have a profile of the person. I can't do that, because by the time I've done the profile and it's written down, by the time I come to the podcast, I've forgotten it all. So it makes no sense me trying to do all of that. My strength is having a proper conversation, seeing patterns in things and resolving them in real time. So we're having this conversation now, and most people will listen to my podcast or see some consultation that I've done for a person and done a report, and think it's amazing. How do you do that? And the reason being is because I've had to adapt. I can't remember these things. I can't put all those details. So I've had to adapt all my life and be a good listener, you know, be able to read the body, be able to read the person's eye movements and their body movements to show that they're comfortable, they're not comfortable. Are they comfortable talking about the things I'm trying to push them in the direction? I'm pushing it a bit too far because I can see the way they're reacting. It's not because I've done my background check. It's because I've had to be really good at reading people in real time. And that's what strength is.
So. And what an incredible strength, that ability to see patterns. That's, I might pick up on the details and completely miss the pattern. And that's the perfect example of why we need all people and all skills and all abilities to complete the puzzle for what the world needs.
Totally. And this is why I do what I do, and I help people from their diversions when they're building a business, because I understand how difficult it is, but there are ways around it. So for instance, all my life, I've used technology even before AI came along. So for the last 35 years at least, I've always used technology to help me get by on my weaknesses. All right. So I'm very good with technology. And my strengths, which is being able to talk one-to-one in a group or lead and etc., I keep those strengths. I work with those strengths. Why try to work on your weaknesses in a massive way when you're stronger? And so you use software or people to help you with your weaknesses. And so I not only help myself with technology, but I help other people with technology and allow them to focus on what makes us unique, what makes us amazing, and strengthen those things.
Yeah, I love it. I will say, so to just give a different point of view or perspective, I love your focusing on the strengths, but I'd argue that there's an opportunity to minimize the weaknesses.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah. So that way, because when we're having to do something that isn't naturally easy for us, it drains so many of our resources. Yeah. So then I've got less time and energy to devote to the good. And so I think an ideal scenario is a combination of strengthening the brain to minimize the challenges. So if you had an ability to, enhance those memory components, you're not going to lose. And this is a question I get from parents, which I think is an interesting one, is if we worked to, whether it's ADHD or dyslexia or a sensory processing disorder, if we work to strengthen some of the challenges, will we lose some of the gifts and natural pieces? And it's what I've seen and experienced in this work for 15 years is you don't lose the gifts and strengths and abilities. That is who you are, and those strengths will always be strengths. They won't go away. It's just closing the gap between those relative strengths and weaknesses. So if we can strengthen, that working memory, then you've got more energy to devote to other places.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right. There are ways, as always, to work on our weaknesses, and it would be great to shorten the gap, as you say. But especially because I struggled for so long without support, I had to find my own system to be able to cope. So yeah, if it's possible to shorten the gap, as you say, perfect. But because I've got used to thinking, okay, it is what it is. I'm not stupid. I'm not an idiot. So let's focus on those things and do the best you can. But you're totally right. If you can shorten the gap, why not, right? Focus on those things if that's possible to do within a given time. And but the things that you're doing, and not only amazing, but what I like about you, Rebecca, I'm sat here watching your body language, watching how we interact, and you have a genuine passion I can see on this subject matter. It's not a thing you're just trying to sell, and it is business, but you have a passion. The passion obviously comes because you have a partner and other, close people around you. But I think it goes beyond that, to be honest. I think you have a general passion just to help people in general, that you don't want to be or have to live in a form of prison. You want to help them to release, escape, to be more relaxed. And I can see that within you when you describe and you express yourself. And that's the wonderful thing about you, Rebecca, is that I can see you have a genuine passion just to help those people. And it's well respected.
That couldn't be a more lovely compliment. Thank you. And I will say, what's kept me in the role that I'm in, every role that you do in every job, there's challenges and there's great things about it. But what's kept me doing the work I'm doing is the people and the individuals. I love seeing the data, because the data tells such a story, and it helps us to understand how do we do better to change the brain and drive outcomes and support these kids and adults that have challenges and struggles. But it's when I sit down with the individuals, it's the person, it's the human story. And to me, to hear in the words of a child, I used to annoy people all the time, and now the neighbors want to play with me. Those real life, that's anytime I'm, frustrated with the numbers or feeling behind on things, my grounding is connecting with the kids and the parents and the families and adults that do the program. And it just, every day in the news, we see the need for it. Through the pandemic, with all the changes that happened, we've seen an escalation in rates of anxiety and depression and ADHD. We see bigger gaps in school and academic achievement, with a disproportionate impact on low socioeconomic regions. So the need is out there for different ways to help and support beyond the traditional. And so I want people to know that, there's a time and a place for medication and counseling, and we're so fortunate to have those services available. But I don't want people to feel stuck, to know that there's a path forward if there's a challenge, whether it's for yourself or a loved one, to know that there's things that we can be doing on our daily lives to optimize our current function while building towards improved functions long term.
And when it comes to support, is it a situation that when you're supporting people, is it only people locally, or can you support people from far and wide, worldwide? How does it work?
Yeah. Brain Balance they're brick and mortar locations all throughout the United States. And so we have on-ground in-center programs, but we also have the at-home program for both kids and adults. We've worked with individuals in over 45 different countries. Wow. We're limited by, right now, our resources are only in English. So to have somebody that's an English speaker, but we'll continue to evolve and update that so we can expand that reach. And when you do the Brain Balance program from home, wherever home is for you, you're still working directly with a live, professionally trained Brain Balance coach. So you enroll in the program and you get all the gear and kit and materials, and you've got a weekly live coach sessions, and then you've got the activities that you're completing on your own at home. So kind of the gym exercises for the brain and body to build and strengthen those networks and pathways. So we're continuing to expand our reach to be able to help more individuals.
So how long has this organization been going on for? I mean, when did it start? And
I've been a part of Brain Balance now for just over 15 years. And it was around for a few years before my husband and I got involved. And we owned and ran 3 centers in the Southeast. And I'll tell you, as much as I've learned in the classroom, I think I've learned more from the kids and adults and families themselves, is to see that their perspective of the challenges and the stresses, and seeing in the same family what one parent is stressed and worried about with their child might be different than what the other parent is stressed and worried about, and the child may have their own set of stressors and worries. And so those 10 years of running the program and delivering the program hands-on was just an incredible learning curve, and we met so many interesting people. And again, I think I learned more from the people and the process than I have in a classroom. And then about 6 years ago, I was asked to join the home office executive team for Brain Balance, to be able to continue to evolve and update and expand our programs and the research, to just continue to expand that reach.
Well, No, without a doubt, I can totally understand why you were respecting in that way to be in that position. And I will say, listeners, honestly, she generally wants to help. It's not just from a business point of view, but she wants to help. And how would they contact you to, if they want to know more information or even take it further? What would they have to do, Rebecca?
Yeah, a great place to start is the book, Back on Track. You can get it on Amazon and it ships internationally. So Back on Track by Dr. Rebecca Jackson is my book. It was my baby. It was, it was exactly like you said, not for the business reason, but how can I equip people with the knowledge and tools and understanding to help themselves and help their kids. You can find out more about Brain Balance by going to brainbalance.com. You can find me personally on LinkedIn under Rebecca Jackson. That's a common name. So if you put Rebecca Jackson Brain Balance, then you'll find me. I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Rebecca Jackson. So you can find me any of those places.
Okay, and everybody, what I'll do is I'll put the information down below and everything will be there for you to be easily decipherable, so you can click and speak some more. And let me tell you something, you couldn't be in better hands with a lady that just has you in mind, because she has true passion just to help you and just to take things further, just to release you from the prison that you may feel you're in. And with that said, Rebecca, unfortunately, we have to leave it there, but I've had a wonderful time with you, an informative time with you, and we are blessed for sure to have you with us.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I'm so happy to have met you. Thank you.
Okay, so in the meantime, listeners, we will speak again very soon. I hope you found great value, and I will say sayonara until the next time.